A very warm welcome to all of you out there to the Institute of Human Sciences in Vienna. My name is Ivan Vejvoda. I'm the acting rector, and we have the great honor and pleasure today of welcoming Sviatlana Tsihanouskaya, the leader of the democratic opposition in Belarus, who is here in Vienna. There was a meeting at the Austrian Foreign Ministry, an international conference on Belarus, where I hope there was some forward-leaning decisions made on Belarus. We are happy to host Sviatlana Tsihanouskaya for a keynote speech, which she now give. After she finishes, I will ask her a couple of questions, and then we go to our panel, who is already here. Madam Tsihanouskaya, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Przybylski, Mr. Vejvoda, dear fellow speakers and guests. Thank you to the Institute for Human Sciences for organizing this event. Indeed, the future for Belarus and the future for all Europe are closely connected. We work together on the same path. Just yesterday, we held a historic event, an international high-level conference on Belarus. This is the first time the topic of Belarus has been discussed in such setting. Chancellor Schallenberg, Minister Linhardt, Commissioner Verhely, ministers of Slovenia, Germany, Finland, Estonia, and Slovakia, and myself participated in the high-level segment. I'm glad that all the leaders were speaking in one voice. Together, we outlined the principles that can become a part of our common strategy on tackling the crisis in Belarus. First, we agreed that there is no other solution to this crisis than through new elections. Only real elections, but no their imitation, will give Belarusians a chance to live up to our full potential as a true part of Europe. Naturally, all political prisoners should be released and be able to participate in these elections. Second, Belarusian sovereignty and independence shouldn't be undermined. Only Belarusians should decide their own future. Dictator will go any length to preserve his power, and Belarusian independence might become yet another bargaining chip for him. Third, we should present a positive alternative to Belarusians. It could include a flexible program of assistance for civil society, a positive agenda such as vaccination program for Belarusians, and the EU's comprehensive economic plan. I hope we all understand here that the dictator will not give up power without pressure. Therefore, I propose to maintain a strong sanction policy, non-recognition and diplomatic isolation of the regime. I want to remind you how it started. August 2020, election stolen, mass protest followed by mass repressions, evidence of torture, deliberate murders, growing quantity of political prisoners. Myself and other political leaders are forced into exile. Next, crackdown on civil society. 240 NGOs and 40 media outlets liquidated. We have a de facto military dictatorship. Earlier this year, Ryanair flight hijack, arrest of Roman Protasevich, attempt to kidnap Olympic athlete and death of diaspora activist in Kiev. And finally, orchestrated border crisis, which is a de facto hybrid attack on the European Union. We can see that the crisis in Belarus has become a security problem for the whole region. Europe should under no circumstances give in to the regime's blackmail through the orchestrated border crisis or otherwise. Even if the border crisis is resolved with the regime in power, who knows what tomorrow will bring? Facilitation or drug trafficking, or maybe a sequence of suspicious nuclear plant accidents. We are dealing with a desperate, impulsive, and insecure person, constantly looking for enemies among his own people. He relies on terror and repressions. But how long can you manage the country in such a way? Will you allow him to terrorize and blackmail us forever? Can such a regime resist the energy of people who didn't have given up for 15 months of a struggle? Despite repressions, my fellow Belarusians, through their courage, through their peaceful protest, won over the hearts and minds of Europeans. Just last week, I met with one of our volunteers, Alexander Dobroyanik, who was released from prison just weeks ago and was able to cross the border. On his home printer, he made 80,000 copies of samizdat leaflets to widespread the information about the real situation. So seeing how fearlessly the people of Belarus were fighting for their freedom, many across Europe could recognize that spirit in themselves. Just a few years ago, many Europeans didn't even know where Belarus was. There was little familiarity with my country and its people. There was a wall between us. Now we are witnessing so much support and love from around the world in hour of need. People who want to take their place among the free and democratic nations of Europe. And this wall is coming down. I'm happy to note that there is also a renewed interest in Belarusian culture in all its forms, be it literature, theater, or music. This is a wonderful way to understand our fight for freedom. You know, it's up to Belarusians to determine which exact role our democratic country will play in Europe. However, what I'm absolutely certain is that it won't be the role of hijacker, blackmailer, or a rogue state. Quite the opposite. Together, we will build a country that will reclaim its rightful place as a democratic, safe, and prosperous nation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Tsihanouskaya. I'm sure that all of us, not so many in this room because of the lockdown in Austria, are completely in solidarity with your struggle. And that's why I would like to ask you the first question. You are leading a truly impressive campaign outside of your country, having had to leave under repressive circumstances. What is it in you? What gives you the strength to lead such a strong campaign?
Indeed, it's extremely difficult. When you are living in exile, when your husband in jail, when you have to take care of your children as well. But every morning when I wake up, I know that I'm not alone. I know that thousands, millions of people in Belarus are continuing their fight. I know the initiatives that have been created during last year are with us. They are struggling with their own methods. I know that Belarusian diaspora that mostly appeared last year only, also working on the places of their lives, where they are living, and communicating with governments. They are keeping Belarus high on agenda. I know that people now are united as never before. All the democratic forces, initiatives, people. I know that democratic countries are keeping their principled and strong position about the situation in Belarus. And I know that every prisoner who sacrificed with their own freedom for the sake of our future fight, they are hoping on us. They know that we are fighting for them, for the future of our country, and I know how they are suffering there. So on the one hand, I have no choice, but I feel my responsibility in front of those people, in front of the future of my country. So, and I feel huge support. So this gives me strength, and I'm moving forward.
Indeed, a huge community struggling for freedom and the rule of law that, as the Americans say, it takes a village, and you are one of the many standing out in this village to help your country. Finally, what are your ideas on how Europe can help Belarus live with its neighbors as this struggle for freedom continues?
Just you have to understand that the best allies now for Europe is Belarusian people. We know that there are a lot of troubles for European society because of the thug in the regime. But we have to understand that there will be no peace or stability in our region while this man in the power. So we are asking for consistency in your foreign policy, consistency in pressure policy on the regime, consistency in supporting of civil society. Keep us on agenda, because it's the rule of the 21st century. While you are in media, you exist. You see, while those migrants who are at the borders now, you see the pictures of those poor people. They're also hostages of this regime. And the focus was shifted from the situation in Belarus to the situation at the border. But our beloved people, thousands of them, are in jail. You can't see them because they are hidden behind the walls, but they are also suffering. They are also starving. They are also dying there. They are trying to kill themselves because of the tortures they are experiencing. Just don't lose attention. Don't lose focus. And of course, everybody who is watching us can support political prisoners and their families. You can write letters. You can help initiatives that taking care of their families. Just put your own small income into our overall fight.
Thank you very much indeed. The plight of the political prisoners has been, unfortunately, a long-standing story in Belarus since the 2010 election and more. We are in solidarity with you in your fight for freedom and wish you all the very best. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We will make a short break in the live stream now to say goodbye to Madam Tsihanouskaya and set up the panel. So be patient with us. We'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you. Okay.
welcome to, after this intermission, to the panel discussion that we're now hosting jointly, IWM and Visegrad Insight. And we have here with us Franak Vejvoda, a special foreign policy advisor to Madame Sviatlana Tsihanouskaya, Christian Ultsch, foreign editor at Die Presse, and Katherine Younger, director for the Ukraine in Dialogue program at the Institute of Human Sciences. My name is Wojciech Przybylski. I'm Visegrad Insight editor-in-chief, and at the same time Europe's Future Fellow at Institute of Human Sciences. This event is also possible because of the support of the Erste Foundation and the Europe's Future program with IWM, that is run with IWM. Let me ask first Christian, as you have also conducted an interview that was going off in Die Presse for the weekend, the special edition with Madame Tsihanouskaya. And let me ask you this question on how, as a foreign affairs specialist, how is Belarus seen in the eyes of Europeans, in the eyes of Austrians, but in the eyes of Europeans overall? And how do you assess Europe's response to what's going on in Belarus?
Okay. Just like Madame Tsihanouskaya mentioned, I think that the protest movement put Belarus on the map in a new way. A lot of people in Europe were really surprised how many brave people came out back then. And I think this has completely changed the image of this country and the image of the people there. So nobody would have reckoned that. And then I find that the European Union tries to cope with that situation in a new way. It's hard, it's a conundrum for me, Belarus, that the European Union, I think, cannot solve. But it has clearly tried to form some policy, to put up some pressure. In the end, it will be up to the people in Belarus to decide their future. But the European Union has already slapped 4 packages of sanctions against the regime in Lukashenko. It has announced a 5th one. And I do believe that Lukashenko didn't quite expect a robust response like this, because it used to be a play for him. It's not the first time that Mr. Lukashenko has rigged elections, and it's not the first time that he has detained opponents. But he used to play with it. After a while, he used to release some prisoners, tried to come into negotiations with the European Union, tried some sort of a full-featured pseudo-liberalization. He was into some seesaw policy between Russia and the European Union. That was his game. I think this game is over now. I think the Europeans do not believe into this trick anymore. He vowed revenge after the sanctions. Europe has slept on his regime after the hijacking of the Ryanair machine. He said that he will come up with a revenge, and he did. He orchestrated the migration crisis. And to me, it's interesting how the European Union reacted on this. I think it used the leverage it has. I think the main power the European Union has is an economic one. And they used it in this crisis by going to the origin countries of the migrants, by threatening airlines with sanctions who transport migrants to Minsk. And this has had an effect pretty soon. I mean, it took some time until the European Union got its act together, as it always takes some time. But I believe, well, the calculus of Mr. Lukashenko didn't add up, and it was a pretty robust reaction by the European Union.
Yeah, I agree. It is an unprecedented situation that we are now, and I'm turning here to Franak, who, as a foreign policy advisor, is on every trip and is seeing the progress done or undone. But before I ask you, from your perspective and the experience of those trips, what do you see is changing in Europe? Let me give a quote from an interview you gave 12 years ago. We're living in a country as in prison. We're fed on government's propaganda. We have no prospects for the future. That is 2009. The prospects for the future today, seen through your eyes, for Belarus in Europe.
Wow. Yes, unfortunately, you see not many, on the one hand, not many things are changing when we see the surface. Still Lukashenko in power, still KGBs, arresting people on daily basis, still mass detentions and media under state control. But on the same time, there is a new quality of society. In 2009, when I apparently gave this interview, perhaps we didn't have such organized people. Hundreds of fantastic initiatives. People gather funds to pay doctors to buy equipment and masks to protect themselves from COVID. People are fundraising to support families of repressed and get children out of the country for vacation of those who are in prison. People are trying to organize the first aid camp near the detention center, because no one will do this. And definitely I'm really proud of this change in quality of Belarusian society. We saw a very disciplined, organized, European, civilized society, which will not accept ever dictatorship in the future. So some sort of immunity has been formed in this protest, and I hope that when changes will come, they will be sustainable and forever. So if I would be given the interview right now, I would be focusing on changes within the society. And Lukashenko also is changing. If you watched his interview to BBC, we saw a desperate man who is trying to blame a BBC reporter on financing Maria Kolesnikova and saying Lukashenko says she's your agent, and other crazy things. And I think this also changed, because 12 years ago, Lukashenko controlled more or less officials, but right now he's surrounded by military loyalists, but other ministries are mostly technocrats. And these technocrats, they are not sharing the same views as Lukashenko. They don't want to share responsibility for his crimes as well. And I am looking forward to the split of elites, which is happening already, but will be visible very soon after another sanction package or another protest or another crazy things or statement Lukashenko will make. And I think this split of elites, the division inside of the system, it could be the spark for the next wave of protest.
Which brings me immediately to a question to Kate, who is following and studying and understanding the change in Ukraine. And many have asked the question of why Belarusians wouldn't do a Euromaidan of that sort. How do you answer to that kind of questions, which necessarily need to be understood better?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to understand both the similarities and the differences between what's happening in Belarus and what has happened in Ukraine over the past decade. So the first thing that I would say is that in both cases, we see this truly remarkable mobilization across the social spectrum, right? And this, I think, is one of the things that has been talked about most in both cases. You're not simply seeing a nationalist mobilization. You're not simply seeing already politically engaged people becoming involved in the protest movements. Instead, you're seeing in Ukraine and in Belarus a linguistically diverse group of people take to the streets, diversity across the gender spectrum, right? All of these things are happening. And in that sense, there are remarkable similarities between the two. At the same time, I think what we're seeing in Belarus is in some ways going back to the European half of this, caught Europeans by surprise, because there hasn't been the same groundwork laid in Europeans' minds. right? So before you get the Euromaidan, which by the way, we're almost exactly 8 years to the day since it began in 2013, you had the Orange Revolution, you had Ukraine without Kuchma, you had this sense in European foreign policy leaders, in terms of the European press, all of that, you had this sense that Ukraine had this potential. But I think what's caught people off guard now is just how remarkable the Belarusian mobilization has been. And I think that's really exciting, and I think that that's something that we here sitting in Vienna and all of us across Europe should really embrace. And this also brings me back to this question that has come up a little bit here, which is what actually are we talking about when we talk about Europe, right? It's easy to say Belarus and Europe, but very smartly, the title of this panel, in fact, is talking about the future of Belarus in Europe. And that has a double sense, right? How is Europe, as traditionally defined, going to keep thinking about Belarus going forward? But also it underscores that Belarus is already part of this Europe in a broader sense. And Ukraine is in that same place. And so we need to keep emphasizing that as we talk about what's going to happen with Belarus going forward. So I'm delighted that we're talking about it in that sense today.
As you pointed out, Catherine, this is so much to do with how we frame the debate and how media frame the debate. Belarus is already on the headlines for a year for various reasons, but it doesn't seem that it's an easy subject. It's not a topic that everybody in Europe, in different readers, different audiences across many European public spaces would pick up immediately and follow. And I found it fascinating your way and how you found the interesting angle, and I think it's a great one in the recent interview that I mentioned in the very beginning, that you in a foreign policy section, you actually start from a human perspective, human story, and personal tragedy of sorts that Ms. Tsihanouskaya is living through as an example of the struggle of Belarusians. How do you keep up that level of attention and, in a way, education of the public about the topic of Belarus?
Okay, to be honest, my task is not to educate people. My task as a journalist is to report about things. And I believe, of course, if you have a human touch in things, it always catches the interest of our readers. Of course, it is my interest to catch the attention of my readers. And this is done if you let people talk about their own lives. And of course, you have gross human rights violations there. If you talk about it in an abstract level, you don't reach the hearts and minds of people. I believe also it's some sort of a media strategy. I do not mean it derogative in any way, but it's a media strategy by the opposition that they keep on telling about their own lives, about their relatives. In Mrs. Tsihanouskaya's case, about her husband, about how hard life is for her, and of course that's a way. And this is a level of discussion. But of course, as a foreign policy journalist, there are also other levels of discussion we have to keep in mind. And I find it interesting in a way how the attention in the European Union was aroused. Because in my view, the attention decreased after a while. I mean, there were no mass protests anymore in Belarus. We didn't have the pictures of the story. And it rose again after the hijacking of the Ryanair machine. There you had a new sort of story, an airplane being hijacked by a state in the middle of Europe on a flight from, it was Athens, Vilnius, and an opponent of the regime being picked out of the airplane and being detained, and afterwards being forced to a confession, being portrayed. There you had all the pictures and all the story again, and in my mind this was one of the first big misjudgment of Mr. Lukashenko. And the second one is that he could come to negotiations by orchestrating and staging a migration crisis, because he knew in a way that this would touch a sore point in Europe. but somehow it stiffened also the spine, because all the memories of the refugee crisis 2015 came up, and Europe has definitely changed since then. It has experience in the meanwhile of being extorted by instrumentalized migrations. We had that story with Erdogan towards Greece. We had that story Morocco, Spain. So Lukashenko copied it in a way, that's what I believe, in order to get the Europeans talking with him again. But he misjudged, because a new round of sanctions was slapped on him. So, well, maybe he did some things wrong. I guess. He got some things wrong, I believe.
He gets some things wrong, but he targeted with this Ryanair hijacking. I think the perfect example of what the new generation of Belarusians are: highly digitalized, using the access to information through all the means that were often more advanced than global theme. I mean, they were using channels that were only later popular through one of the social communication channels. I don't know if it's proper to advertise right now, but regardless of that, there is a societal change, and here I'm turning to both Franak and Kate to try to grasp it. What's in there? Belarus, for the previous years, was also experiencing digital hype. Some of the global companies being positioned in Minsk and being developed from Minsk and successful globally, that was giving a new sense of change, societal change, but also cultural change coming. How important that is today, and how does the digital aspect of it help or hurt in the case of Belarus? Franak, you're also a journalist.
Yes, actually I used to be a journalist just before this everything started, and I didn't plan to participate in the campaign, and everything came by surprise to all of us. But speaking about the situation with the IT world in Belarus, when you have so little space, then the society tries to fill out the space with creativity. If you are media and you want to reach your audience, but all the websites are blocked, you cannot criticize the government, then you try new technologies, new spaces. And this made Belarusian IT sector so developed, because Lukashenko didn't care about it, didn't understand technology. So he said, okay, do what you want, but don't touch my economy, potash, oil, this is mine. And IT, he just gave a carte blanche because he didn't see any threat from them. Just a small reservation, for these people. And these people, they were creative, and they used this small opportunity to develop their businesses. 80,000 of Belarusians got involved in IT sector, and they built projects such as YEPAM, World of Tanks, application flow for women health, many other instruments that are world popular, became world popular brands. And many of these people who got involved into IT sector, they were driving force of the revolution. They were on the protests, they were sponsoring the movement in general, and thanks to them, all this revolution started. On the other hand, there were more technologies coming to Belarus, such as Telegram messaging app, which is the space where you can create your own media with 5 seconds by 2 clicks. You have your own channel. And when Lukashenko started to block traditional websites, closing printed papers, people just started to open Telegram channels. When he shut down the internet entirely on August 9, only 2 applications were working, TikTok and Telegram. And suddenly TikTok became the major political platform for Belarusians, where they shared the videos of beatings, of torture, the arrests of people, also big marches. And perhaps TikTok censorship did not manage to block all these videos quickly. This is why you could watch millions of views on TikTok of political protest videos in Belarus segment of this platform. I don't advertise, I just say that if you have limited space, you use all the tools that are available. And Lukashenko, very old school politician, he underestimated these platforms. He underestimated technologies and their power, and Belarusians, on contrary, they used these technologies in full. But technologies are also dual use, and right now we see that through Telegram, through technology, Lukashenko identify the unloyalists, enemies of the people, and arrest them massively. And now we see the cleansing of all active groups, initiatives, and individuals through the technologies. They take one person, check the account of this person, and arrest all his contact book. So, and this is horrible. And this is why many people right now on Zoom calls, they are, with Sviatlana Tsihanouskaya, they are wearing masks or filters, Zoom filters, in order to not reveal their identity. This is the only way to continue resistance on the ground.
At the same time, we have hackers, groups that actually... Cyber partisans that penetrated the databases of the ministries.
And leaking the data, recordings of Lukashenko's officials, when they discuss, we should crack down on this media outlet. And all this correspondence, communication is being recorded by Lukashenko's secret services. Then our cyber partisans are coming to their databases, downloading all these materials and publish these materials. And it reveals, first of all, that there is no unity there is no confidence there, but also it gives people hope and power and energy to continue the resistance.
It seems that what is happening in Belarus and to much extent in Ukraine, this is not catching up with the West. This is the story of the future. How do you comment that from the point of view of also societal change that is taking place also in the aspect of digital and communication?
I think this is extremely important in two ways, one of which is specifically related to this media and technology question. And I think what we've seen in both the Ukrainian case and now especially in the Belarusian case is that these media technologies are also the way that the story spreads outside of the country, right? This is the way that we here in Vienna are able to know what's happening, is through alternative technologies, as foreign correspondents' access, for example, is extremely limited, as the ability to actually be on the ground in Belarus is cut off, we are at least still able to tell some of these stories. And I think this is one of the things that's so important and great, Christian, that you're able to do this, to tell the story of what's going on in Belarus through an interview with Madame Tsihanouskaya. But I also think that in another sense, not just this technology sense, Wojciech, what you said is so key, which is that we can't treat it as if these are places that are only now kind of lagging behind, starting to catch up to us, exactly as you say. Instead, they're at the front line of a lot of the developments that have become so pressing for all of us. So in the Ukrainian case, of course, you think immediately of disinformation, of information warfare, right? Technologies that were pioneered in Ukraine in 2014, 2015 by the Russian state, then went on to affect all of us in a lot of different ways. And this is another instance in which I think the Belarusian case goes beyond just the European context, right? This is something that is happening within Europe, but it's also happening globally. And so it's so important for us all to be paying attention to that.
So what would you pick as what to watch for in this changes? What do you?
I mean, to me, I'm very much inclined to think that what we're seeing in the case of Belarus is, to take a very kind of depressing example, is the sort of indifference on the part of the regime to pressure from outside, in a certain sense, right? I do see that the sanctions have hit hard in certain ways. But at the same time, there are other places that he can turn outside of the European Union to meet the needs that he still has, right? He's not completely economically cut off. He's not, there are other, Russia is the obvious example, but also looking beyond to a broader world, China, places like this, right? And so I think that this may be the next wave that we're seeing, as Anna Applebaum recently wrote in The Atlantic, right, is this autocracy Inc. And these sort of figures across the globe who are connected in the sense that they feel a sense of impunity and a sense of inviolability from the more moral international community, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. And we just heard in the opening remarks of Madame Tsihanouskaya her call, her plea to Europe to keep consistency in the foreign policy. Now, I was wondering what that means, whether it touches upon solely Belarus or whether it is a little bit broader. When we mention China, I'll explain my point here. When we mention China, there is a talk of whether to put pressure on Mr. Lukashenko by closing down the railroad traffic, cargo that ships essentially cargo from China to Europe. I mean, both ways, but that is in control of the European Union country, Poland, in Malaszowice. There is a cargo port for that. But of course, that would require the whole European to act on it and to agree on it, to put pressure. We know for a fact that Mr. Lukashenko is afraid of that. In September, he was reassuring his Chinese partners, who are very important for economic reasons to him, that nothing will happen to that fight. But I wonder if Europe, do you think that Europe would be willing, how much Europe would be willing to risk, European Union would be willing to risk seeing how the situation develops and to put at stake?
Well, interesting. I believe that the European position keeps on developing. We have now a new source of sanctions. So it was just 2 weeks ago, there was a new sanction regime. We've never had that before. So it's a new set of sanctions against the instrumentalization of migrants, for instance. I don't believe that the European Union is in the business of regime change. It treads carefully, especially, we're talking about Austria. I mean, the enthusiasm of the Austrian government, I believe, but maybe you know it better, ends when interests of Austrian companies are touched. I also believe that it is a dilemma, as you've mentioned, that Lukashenko can always turn to the East. And as far as I know, Russia, Ukraine, and China are far more important trading partners than Europe. I could imagine that he would like to see China more engaged because they have no strings attached, no conditions in whatsoever. So they offer economic cooperation, but no conditions. They're not interested in human rights or anything. And maybe he could use China to balance Russia in a way. But on the other hand, obviously, China isn't that much interested in Belarus, and that is bad luck for him, because China is always interested, above all, in resources and securing resources, and obviously that's not their preferred playing field. So that's also a dilemma. But your question was, how far would Europe go? I think the buck stops when it would really hurt European economic interests. You can see that in their foreign policy vis-a-vis China, for instance. I mean, Germany would never do anything that would really hurt their economic interests. So I think that there's a line. But I don't know where this line will lie. As I've said, it keeps on developing.
It's interesting. I think there is a misperception, but correct me if I'm wrong, generally in Europe about how important, for instance, for Belarus, European markets are versus Chinese. And I think mostly the trade is between Belarus and Europe rather than with even China. China plays here an important part, just like Russia, because it ships products through Belarus. But exactly touching on this point, Franak, and asking for your assessment about the short game, but also the long game, which is here, the political game between states, interests, powers, essentially. My question to you, how do you see this is going on now, but also in, say, 5-10 years? Thinking about the future of Belarus, because in the current context, it's very much driven by reactions to different impulses. There is an impressive consistency of the team of Madame Tsihanouskaya, yourself in it. I wanted to hear your assessment of what you have been accomplishing so far and where it's the next day as you're traveling across Europe, but also what's the longer goal for Belarus?
Sure. Consistency here is key. Since last August, our demands did not change. Only free and fair elections will solve the crisis, nothing else. And we repeated thousands of times. And we repeated everywhere at all meetings. And yesterday there was a call with Chancellor Merkel, and the whole conversation was like half an hour or something. It was actually about consistency, what we can do to put pressure on the regime, how to force Lukashenko to negotiate and conduct new elections, and how to make him stepping down, which is task number one for Belarusians, of course, but with the help of international community, it will be faster, as we believe. And this consistency is very important because what we are afraid that at some point, Austrian companies or any French lobbyists or some potash-related groups, they will be starting, oh, perhaps sanctions don't work, we should get back to normalization, speak to Lukashenko, sanctions are only harming our relationship and our business interests of Europe. We are afraid of this. This is why we propose. Let's hit harder, then the crisis will be solved faster, and in the longer run, your interest will win. And this is the message we passed also to Chancellor Schallenberg and Minister Linhardt. You know, yes, there is some risk for Austrian companies in Belarus. At some point, you're not able to invest in state-related projects, because we ask you, no contacts with the state. We ask Raiffeisen, do not collaborate with the regime companies. But in the longer run, after a year or two, your interests in Belarus will remain, but your possibilities will be much, much bigger. So we are investing into the better future. In the longer run, you will win. And Austria, as the third investor in Belarus, will only take advantage of this. But you should, right now, you should a bit make some strong steps and perhaps to make concessions in your current interests in Belarus. And China's presence, as you mentioned, it's not so big, but transit is critical. If even one day of closed border, so all Russian and Chinese goods are stuck or have to find another way to Europe, they will put such pressure on Lukashenko. China is very unhappy with this crisis in Belarus because Lukashenko promised them stability and safety of their investments. Right now, in the last 12 months, no new projects of China in Belarus. A Great Stone Park is frozen, nothing is developing there. Some projects moved to Ukraine and other countries. So China will not be supporting or compensating Lukashenko's losses, definitely. Russia can, but for how long? And what it will ask in exchange, this is also the question. And definitely Russia, if it feels that Lukashenko is not fulfilling all the expectations and demands, it will change it. So Lukashenko is afraid of Russia more than he is afraid of Europe or the West.
So you would denounce the claims that he's coordinating his activity on the border right now with Russia?
We can only speculate here, but I don't like when we always say that some people say that Kremlin is behind everything, behind hijacking, behind the crisis, behind the murders, behind repressions, behind propaganda. It helps Lukashenko to justify himself. I'm just, the teddy bear here, that's Russia, Putin is doing everything. And this is the perception he wants to have, that the big brother is standing behind him, and Europe stands back and say, oh, if it's Russia, then we will not touch it, it's too dangerous. And this helps his narrative.
Mm-hmm. Christian, may I jump in? I think the skepticism about sanctions could rise in a way because if you're honest, so far the sanctions haven't changed Lukashenko's behavior at all. The second point I want to make, because you said he's more afraid of Putin than of everybody else. I believe that Putin is not interested in all that in political instability in a neighboring country like Belarus. He's not interested in the downfall of Lukashenko because he would have to be afraid that the same thing could happen in Russia. The third point I wanted to make is I believe that autocrats all over the world have learned some lessons from the Colored Revolution, from the Arab Spring. which is, and you can see it somehow, it's tragic and dramatic, but you can see it also in Belarus, which is don't back down, push back with brutal force, because this can pay off. I mean, that's really a brutal lesson, but you can see it in different places all over the world, from starting in Damascus, but also elsewhere.
If I may to react to this very quickly? Sorry.
Okay.
No, please.
First, sanctions did not start working yet. The real sanctions will be in December, when potash, US sanctions on potash will start working. Well, everything we saw so far from European Union and this 150-something persons, that's not a real sanctions, that's more symbolic gesture. And the companies that were included on the sanction list changed their names, owners, or reorganized their delivery to goods. And for example, exports to Netherlands increased 5 times this year, including sanctioned products. So far we can't measure do sanctions work or not, and there are so many loopholes to avoid them.
Right.
80% of potash is not sanctioned. How we can measure, the efficiency? So we expect that the next sanction policy, sanction regime, will actually close these loopholes, and then we will be able to assess their efficiency. And regarding brutal force, there is a risk if there is this peaceful change through elections as we want. If there is the freeze in this stalemate, then there will be a risk of violent change, because there is no stability right now, which is what Russia, as you mentioned, Russia wants. Lukashenko is not a guarantor of peace. Actually, he is now the reason why the crisis is ongoing, and it also irritates Kremlin, as we believe. But at the same time, Russia doesn't want the changes through the revolution. And this is the issue. Are we able to formulate the solution, the scenario in which there is peaceful transition, Lukashenko is down, democracy comes, and Russia doesn't feel like its interest or potential threat, potential model of the revolution inside of Russia was created.
Do you have an idea for that?
This is a million dollars question.
We'll come to that. Let me go to Katherine and ask, because we have so much talk about Kremlin's strategy in Belarus, their interest. As we speak and we focus on Belarus, at the same time we have the buildup of troops on the border with Ukraine, in which oftentimes we see the issue of conflict on the border with EU somehow intertwined with the strategy and with the communication on both on the side of Kremlin and the response of the Western allies. How do you read that, and how do you also explain the importance of both Belarus and Ukraine in the Kremlin strategy?
So this is a big question, and one that is occupying me very much these days. But what I would say is that I'm kind of out of the game of guessing what's going on in Putin's head. This is kind of one of the things that I think all of us spend too much time doing, and we kind of can't get at. But at the same time, we need to try to figure out what's going to happen here. So I think one of the things that's happening is there's a real temptation to connect what's going on in the two countries, to connect this potential troop buildup, to connect these renewed discussions of what's going to happen with the Minsk protocols, right? Are we going to actually finally force Ukraine to adopt some of what was decided at Minsk? This is also a very interesting moment in the history of sort of Belarus situating and Lukashenko situating himself between Russia and the West, right, which I think is noteworthy here, and also reveals how much has changed in the years in the intervening period. But what I would say is that I think Franak is so right to say, let's focus on what's going on in terms of Lukashenko himself, in terms of what he's doing, rather than letting ourselves get carried away by what's going on behind him. And so there I would say, I think it's absolutely true that that decisions are being made in Minsk, right? Not in Moscow necessarily, but that of course we can't overlook the power dynamics at play. So this gets back at this question of agency in this entire story. And I was really delighted that we had a conversation here about the agency of the Belarusian people and of Belarus as a state. And I think I'm excited to see where conversations like that go in the future. So yes, Russia is looming, China is looming, all of these things, but I love here that we're actually talking about what's going on in Belarus. And I think this is something that's also been important in the case of Ukraine.
Now I'll throw a hypothetical situation at you with a request to give your ideas. Imagine the situation of this impossible stalemate continues for much longer. What should Europe's reaction to that be? I mean, how can you imagine not in the perspective of the next half a year, but Franak will kill me for that question. But imagine 3-5. But if, yes, Katherine.
Yeah, so here I can speak again. I hate to keep coming back to my Ukrainian experience here, but I have a good Ukrainian colleague who's used the metaphor in terms specifically of the war in eastern Ukraine, of Ukrainians having to move from the sprinter's track to the marathoner's track. Right, so there's a certain degree of mobilization that can happen for a particular period of time. And I think that that is the case also in terms of the European reaction to the situation in Belarus. And Kristen, you brought this up as well, right? You saw a wave of really strong interest come up around the time of the initial protests, then again around Ryanair, and then again now. But what can we do to help us all shift to this marathoner's track if this is something that we're going to end up having to do, right? Then it becomes about increasing the possibilities for contacts between people, not necessarily at the foreign policy level, not necessarily in these closed offices, but increasing contacts between people who are, for example, academics sitting here at the Institute for Human Sciences. We're very interested in being able to build relationships, professional relationships, also friendships between Belarusians who are doing such exciting work, not only on their own country, but on broader phenomena, and their counterparts from North America, from Western Europe. And so if we can pursue that course, that is a different way to keep Belarus on people's minds and not let it only surface again when something dramatic and tragic happens.
Franak, as I said, I know that you will not like my question and you might profoundly disagree with that, but still I'll ask it, this dystopian future, that this situation continues. What's the response? And tell me also how I'm wrong by asking it.
No, it's important to ask such questions to understand the probability of such scenario, and probability is quite low. If you ask this question in last spring, before Ryanair hijacking, I would say, there is a high level of probability. There will be stalemate, other conflicts will happen, Karabakh, Eastern Ukraine, something in Africa, and the attention will be lost, the momentum will be lost. But then crazy things started to happen, and we saw that Lukashenko started losing control over the situation. We received so many contacts within the system, thanks to sanctions primarily. When sanctions are imposed, suddenly all the people within the regime realized they are democratic fighters, and they want to make sure they have contact with Tsihanouskaya's team and Coordination Council. But right now, after everything happened, it's impossible to get back to normalization. After Tsihanouskaya kidnapping in Tokyo, migration crisis, Ryanair hijacking, several deaths, multiple evidence of torture, plus 300 political prisoners, all over about 1,500 political prisoners in jails. It's impossible to get back to normality. And the issue might be up to 1 year, the question. I don't believe the constitutional referendum he announced for February will change things, but it can create another trigger for changes. I don't believe in Kazakh scenario, in which Lukashenko preserves the power in a new role, quite symbolic. And today you know that Nazarbayev left the party of Tokayev, but it's impossible, such things in Belarus. Lukashenko plays all in, va-bank, we call it, and it doesn't seem like he has the plan for more than 1 year. I think he doesn't want to leave as the loser. Right now, any concessions to Tsihanouskaya, if it would be not Tsihanouskaya actually, but some man, actually for him it will be easier to accept and to agree to start negotiations with Babarika, for example, whom he visited in prison. But for Tsihanouskaya, it seemed like no way, to lose to women. He hates women, and right now, I think he's in this desperation, trying to win another weeks or months, trying to find answers in Putin's team. How should I proceed? But I don't think he has the plan for this 3-5 year stalemate. Maximum what can happen if we lose attention of the West, if something happen in the world, that the presidential elections can be moved 1 or 2 years earlier, not 2025 as it's supposed to be, but 2023. Plus another issue which is also important to realize, next year, 2023, Belarus might become the member of UN Security Council by line. And this will be the issue, the question. Will Belarus become member of UN Security Council with Lukashenko or without? And that could be 2 absolutely different outcomes of this membership. And I think people around Lukashenko also count these things.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if he satisfied your curiosity about the response, but now I have to ask you, Christian, whether, if thinking in the perspective of a longer regime durée like that, Europe is really prepared to have such a neighbor. How would you imagine European Union response? On one side, keeping control of the situation. On the other hand, always being troublesome for the neighborhood. Do you think Europe has the appropriate tools or need to develop some, as Europe is trying to?
Good question. I mean, I'm really out of the business of prophecies, because I was too often wrong, and surprise caught us every now and then, be it in Belarus or the United States or in the UK. So it's I quit predicting. But of course, it is imaginable that there is, as you've mentioned, some sort of a stalemate which lasts for some time. And of course, it is possible that the European attention gets drawn away very swiftly. We've seen that all over again. It could turn to Ukraine, it could turn to Africa, it could turn to China. I don't know where. There are many possibilities. I think that the key question is economically, and that's the strength of the European Union, as I've said at the beginning, are its economic tools. And I can imagine that it will be hard for Lukashenko if he does not deliver economically, because this will turn up the heat on him internally again. But as I've said, so far, I don't see any signs of ruptures in this regime, and I cannot imagine that he just goes. I believe that he will fight back until the very last moment. So it's a really hard nuts to crack, and I do believe, at some stage it would be important to have some sort of a dialogue between the opposition and at least representatives of the regime, not with Lukashenko personally, but with some people. Because otherwise I cannot imagine how a political solution could look like. Mm-hmm. But maybe that's a question for you.
I think that would be now the last question, really, of this floor discussion, to see the options. The willingness for dialogue, I think there exists, like with everyone. But are there really options on the table of such a dialogue right now in the not distant future? We saw a wave of people defecting, mostly diplomats, mostly moderates of the regime, right? Is it still continuing? How do you see the likelihood of that development?
Defections happen when something extraordinary happens. National ultimatum, national strike, hijacking of the plane. When nothing is happening significant, no defections. People are just hoping that They don't want to be exposed somehow. They don't want to be on the spotlight. But all the sides are speaking, all the parties are speaking about the dialogue. Lukashenko speaks about dialogue. We speak about dialogue. Even Putin speaks about dialogue between Lukashenko and opposition. But all of us are meaning different things. For Lukashenko, dialogue, it is when Merkel is calling him. This is the dialogue. For us, dialogue, it's when Belarusian people decide on new elections, and Lukashenko is not necessary to be at this dialogue table. And for Putin, dialogue, it means, Lukashenko, if you will behave not very well, I know how to punish you. And so this is the problem. We should identify, the one understanding of dialogue, what we want in the end, and where this dialogue must lead. We should divide dialogue and negotiations, because right now we confuse these two things. Negotiations must have a very clear outcome, and dialogue, it can be just talking for talking, and this is something we want to avoid, because talking for talking will lead us actually to the stalemate, but not to the solution. And negotiations must have clear outcomes, but also rules, and we must recognize the existence of each other. Lukashenko still doesn't recognize the existence of Belarusian society, who doesn't want him in power. So the first step, when he recognizes, when such contact happens, that will be a very important sign that we have the progress. And I think this is why we need the pressure right now to make the regime, not necessarily Lukashenko, to recognize that there is a problem and there is Belarusian society with which you must talk.
Thank you very much. We'll close this at this moment. From a pandemic strike, Austria under lockdown, but still with possibility to operate when security measures are followed. Katherine Younger, IWM Vienna, Franak, Viacorka, Ms. Sviatlana Tsihanouskaya team, Christian, Ultsch, Die Presse, Wojciech Przybylski, Visegrad Insight, fellow at IWM. Thank you very much for watching. We apologize for not having live comments, but that wasn't simply possible to manage this way, but I'm sure at next events of IWM it will be resuming.